Hello, book lovers and English learners. Welcome to our November live read along. And I'm very happy to be back live for a new live read along series. I'm Lydie Bureau and I'm an English teacher in France. I'm also the founder of Lydie's Book Club, a book club for English learners. And in this book club, I host live readings like this one today and workshops, live workshops on adaptations of classics of literature and contemporary novels in their original text for advanced learner. I also tend to prioritize books that are written by women. And each month we read and explore a different book for all levels of English. So this month it's going to be A2 level, A2 plus, so pre-intermediate level of English. And 3 times a month, I meet the members of the book club in a live workshop session via Zoom to discuss the chapters read over that week so that the members of the book club can improve their speaking and their critical thinking skills and also meet other book lovers and English learners. This month, we are reading the A2 plus pre-intermediate level adaptation of The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton. It's in a 2022 edition, Penguin Readers edition. If you want to know more about the original novel, which is this book, so this is the adaptation for pre-intermediate level, and that's the original book. So you can see the difference. So you have about 60 pages here with illustrations. Look at this. And yeah, you have about 69. There are 69 pages. And at the back, you have some questions, comprehension, reading and comprehension questions, some grammar exercise. I love these Penguin Readers books. And some project work, for teachers using these books is really useful when you're preparing a module or a sequence on a particular book, especially from Penguin Readers adaptation. They're so well made. All the worksheets are online. You can find them online as soon as you log in you create a free account. So in each book, you're gonna have a code here. There is a code. And with this code, you will have access to all the digital content and resources. So you will have the digital version of the book, the audio version, and all the exercises and worksheets that Penguin Readers created based on this adaptation. So it's very well made and very useful for teachers wanting to implement reading in their teaching. And here is the original text that you can see. I've made some my notes. I recommend, even as a young learner, as a beginner learner, I recommend you to make notes. You always have some space here on the side, around the text that you can write on. Hey, hello, Etienne, welcome to the live. So I really like making writing annotations because it really helps me remember what a certain passage is about, at which point are we in the novel. It's very useful. And don't be shy. I would say some people really don't like making notes. Then it's fine. You can use Post-it like this one. And you can just write your notes on the Post-it but then it might be a little bit overwhelmed. So it might be a little bit too much. You might have too many post-its, I would say, because with those ones, it's pretty easy to find the right page or the quote that you highlighted. Um, Personally, it's much easier to annotate like this directly on the text. So maybe buy an edition that you will write on it, and another one, a beautiful edition version of the book that you will not touch. So then it can that can be a solution if you're not too keen on writing on the text. But either way, I find it very useful, and also it makes you in a very active mode as a reader. And I think it helps you keep up with the story, and also helps you memorize, memorize, or at least remember. This way you can easily remember what the story was about, is if it's been many years that you haven't read the book, and or it just helps you remember what this a certain passage is about, or the different events in the story. So this is my advice, but of course you're free to do as you please. So if you want to know more about this novel and its author, Edith Wharton, and her work, I invite you to listen to the podcast episode 26 from Ladies Book Club podcast, Reading English. It's called An Introduction to Edith Wharton and the Age of Innocence, which is available on this YouTube channel and also on the Spotify podcast, Reading English. And today, this is our first live reading session of the Age of Innocence. So we are going to read chapters 1 and 2. And on Saturday, the 23rd of September, so in 2 weeks, I will host the first live workshop session in which we will discuss the chapters 1 to 4, okay? Because this Saturday I will read the chapters 3 and 4. So in 2 weeks, so a little bit, it's there is a lapse of 1 week difference. So in 2 weeks, we will discuss the workshop. In the workshop, the chapters read this week. So I hope I was clear. Anyway, you can find all the dates and of all the upcoming live readings and workshops on the subscribing page. So if you want to attend these live workshop session, you have to become a member of the book club and join us at Ladies Book Club. So you can find the link in the description of this video. And on the subscribing page, you will find all the information that you need. And if you have any questions, then you just email me or message me, or you send me a private message you message me on socials. I would say the easiest way would be Instagram. So that's it for me now. So let's get started. Here we go. So, The Age of Innocence. I'm not going to do an introduction of the book, because you can find more about the book in the introduction, the podcast episode that I did last week, so that I posted last week. So I will start the reading now. So let me show you a little bit inside the book. So here is the content, content of all the chapters. So in total, there are 12 chapters. And here you've got the people in the story, the main characters in the story. I'm sorry, I have something. And here are images of keywords that we're going to come across in this novel. And that might be very useful to you, although they're very easy to, I'm definitely sure that a lot of them you already know. I will just read this little text or short introduction about the story, this note about the story, and then I'm going to start chapter 1. So Edith Wharton was born in 1862 and died in 1937. She was an American writer who was born in New York in the United States of America, but who lived in France for much of her adult life. She came from a very rich high society family, so the one that she describes in this novel. She always studied hard and began to write stories from a young age. Wharton wrote The Age of Innocence just after the First World War, which was between 1914 to 1918. And at this point, she was living in France. So she moved permanently to France in 1910, and she lived there the rest of her life until she died. She is actually buried in Versailles, which is just outside Paris, in the suburb of Paris. It's where you have Louis XIV's big castle, Versailles, that you probably heard of. And it's in the southwest of Paris. And she used to live first in the center of Paris, and then she bought a house outside in the north of Paris, in the outskirts of Paris, in a little village called Saint-Brice-sous-Forêt, which is now a town, a proper town. But at the time, it was very much the countryside, yes. And she bought this beautiful villa. It's like a mansion, I would say. And now this building, unfortunately, is not open to the public. I hope one day we'll be able to visit it. It's owned privately, and for now, you can only visit perhaps the place where she's buried in the cemetery near Versailles, in Versailles, near the castle. You can at least see her tomb in Versailles. And if you are doing a trip to America, there is this big house that she bought before she left for France. This beautiful country house that she refurbished and redecorated herself. Well, she got the ideas and the inspiration from all her travels. And she had help, of course, to refurbish the house. But all the ideas came from her. She loved interior design and the European styles. So she bought this house called The Mount, and it's in Lenox, Massachusetts. And this place is now a museum open to the public. They do a lot of events. So I invite you to go on their website and have a look. If you're from America, then it's great. If you want to visit a new place, If you live in New York, it's even better because it's not so far, although America is big. So yeah, that's probably an idea for you, a trip idea for you. Um, so yeah, I put the link in the description of this video if you want to have a look at the website of the Mount. So she was remembered. So at this point, after the war, she was remembering New York as it was when she was a child in the 1870s. And in the next 50 years, many and since many years since this time, over 50 years, many great changes happened, both in the world and in New York society. The people in the story watch others closely and do not approve of unusual behavior. This makes life difficult for men, but more difficult for women, of course. Like Wharton's fashionable family, the people in the story live in New York in the winter and in Newport, Rhode Island in the summer. In New York, they often go to dinners and opera with other high society families, very influential families. Some people also travel south to Florida during the winter, where it is much warmer than New York. So I'm going to put the mic a little bit higher. Here we go. So that being done, let's read the novel. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to leave your questions in the description, in the comments, and I'll be happy to answer you. Chapter 1, A New Face at the Opera. On the January evening in the early 1870s, Newland Archer entered a box at New York's Old Opera House. People were talking about building an expensive new opera house a long way up Manhattan, around 60th Street. But the high society of New York were happy with their first little opera house and felt no need for anything new. So here you see the narrator speaks at the third person here, describing the scene and the main character, Newland Archer. So we as a reader have this, as readers, have a position of the observer. We observe this strange, particular society of New York. The music was already playing when Archer arrived. He knew, of course, that it was not the fashion to get to the opera too early. And for him, it was the perfect moment to arrive. Just as he opened the door of the box, he was met by the words, he loves me not, he loves me, coming from a singer on the stage. So that's the opera singer that sings that. So you see already that the certain convention of the time where you should not arrive too early at the opera. Otherwise, I don't know, it means probably that you have to just have to arrive on time, in the sense that you have to show that you have other important, you're a busy person, I guess. Archer sat down and looked around him. Opposite was the box of old Mrs. Mingott, who was unable to come to the opera now, but who always had family there. This evening, her daughter, Mrs. Welland, and her son's wife, Mrs. Mrs. Lovell Mingott were in the box. So the box, as you had the picture here, is this, the box. Yeah, the opera box. Yeah, in the sense that usually those boxes were where the seats were the richest would seat, the most important people would seat. This evening, Mrs. Lovell Mingott were in the box. Archer's eyes turned immediately to the beautiful young blonde woman sitting behind them, Mrs. Welland's daughter, May. She was listening wide-eyed to the love song, her fingers touching the pretty white flowers lying on her knee. A picture of Archer's future came into his mind. Sitting in the garden of a fashionable Italian hotel, reading a favorite book to his lovely young wife. He remembered the look on May Welland's innocent face just a few hours earlier as she agreed to marry him. So this young May Welland is the fiancé, is Archer, Newland Archer's fiancé. Well, really, Mr. Jackson, a grey-haired man sitting in front of Archer, said suddenly, "What are the Mingotts thinking?" He was looking at a slim young woman who was going into Mrs. Mingott's box. She was shorter than May, with dark hair around her face, and she was wearing a most unusual dark blue dress. So here you've got the vocabulary of unusual. You see this idea of being not ordinary, an original person. That's an unusual dress to wear at the opera. She did not seem to notice how many eyes were turned toward her as she sat down next to May. Who is this strange woman? Archer felt very embarrassed. Could this be May's cousin? Known by everyone in the family as poor Ellen Olenska? He knew that she was staying with their grandmother, old Mrs. Mingott, after arriving suddenly from Europe a day or two ago. Archer approved of the way the Mingotts were taking her back into the family in private. But he was very surprised to see her in public. What an idea, bringing her to the opera with the young woman he was to marry. So you see, he's happy about the fact that the family is supporting poor Ellen, but at the same time, he doesn't like the fact that she is sitting next to his new wife, well, future wife. Doesn't look good in his image. He and May were planning to announce their engagement in a few weeks' time. Mr. Jackson was right. What were the Mingotts thinking? But Archer knew that old Mrs. Mingott liked to be different. Who else chose to have a huge light-colored house like one you might find in Paris, a long way up Manhattan, near Central Park? So here you see that Mrs. Mingott, the old lady, the grandmother of the family, seems to be an original as well. Archer heard the voices of the other men in the box. Look at that! After everything that's happened. She left her husband, Count Olenska, didn't she? He's a terrible man. He's the very worst. I met him in France when he wasn't with women. I met him in France. When he wasn't with women, he was spending money without a thought. And didn't Countess Olenska run away with her husband's secretary? Maybe she did, but she was soon living alone in Venice. Mr. Lovell Mingott went there to get her. Oops, sorry. She was terribly unhappy. So, was she too unhappy to be left at home during the opera? Everyone laughed. But poor May Welland, being seen in public with a woman like that. The first part of the opera was ending, and Archer jumped up. He felt that he should be the first man to enter Mrs. Mingott's box and stand by May's side. The moment he entered the box, his eyes met May's. He knew that she understood everything, and there was no need for words. Newland, this is my niece, Countess Olenska, said Mrs. Welland. Archer shook the Countess's hand and sat down next to May. Have you told your cousin that we were engaged? He said quietly. I want everybody to know tonight. We should announce it this evening at the Beaufort's ball. So soon, replied May, her eyes shining. Mamma might not agree. And why change what we planned? So here you have a lovely image, an illustration here, Newland Archer. Here May Welland, the future wife, and here Countess Olenska, and here probably May's, the mothers. I would say probably here. I don't know. Yeah, the mothers. Anyway. Then she smiled. Why don't you tell Ellen? She remembers playing with you when you were children. May pushed back her chair from him to talk to Countess Olenska. We did play together, didn't we? Said the Countess, turning toward him. Then she looked at the people around her. Ah, how all these brings the past. Ah, how all this brings the past back to me. You've been away a very long time, said Archer. It feels like hundreds of years. It's possible that I've died, and this dear old place is heaven. He did not know why, but Archer did not like this unusual way of describing New York society. Heaven. Mrs. Regina Beaufort gave a ball once a year, and her house was one of the few in New York with a ballroom. So remember, a ballroom is a room where they host a ball, people dancing. So it must be a big house with to have such a big room to host a ball. Having a room for dancing, which was unused every other day of the year, was thought to be very superior. So you see that the ballroom is only used once a year when she's hosting this particular ball after the opera. So you can see there is this idea of a sort of a routine annual ritual set throughout many years that people are used to. And this time of the year, there is the opera and the ball. So it's kind of every year is the same routine, the same ritual, tradition. So And it shows here again that Regina Beaufort is very wealthy and shows through the hosting of this ball her superiority in a way compared to other families. So you have the word, yeah, in bold, and you can find them here. You can find the book in the glossary at the back. But superior in the fact of feeling have a sense of being above other people. 20 years ago, when the Beauforts were first married, the high society of New York did not approve of the beautiful Regina Dallas's husband. No one knew anything about Julius Beaufort, the rich and handsome banker who was believed to be from England. But soon it was agreed that the Beaufort's house was one of the best in New York. An hour after the opera, Archer arrived at the ball, afraid that the Mingotts might bring Countess Olenska here, too. From the conversation between the other men in his box, he knew that they should not. He found Mrs. Welland and her daughter standing with a group of young men and women. May looked excited, and Archer guessed that she was announcing her engagement. Soon he was holding May close as they danced around the room. I did what you asked. I have announced our engagement, she said. Yes, it's the right thing to do. Now that your cousin is here, he answered, smiling. Did you tell her? May asked. There wasn't time, he lied. The truth was that he felt too embarrassed to speak about private things to the strange foreign women. May looked disappointed. She might think that I've forgotten her. She's one of the family, you see. You must explain that I wanted you to tell her at the opera before announcing it here. Of course, I will tell her, dear May, but I haven't seen her yet. Is she here? No, she decided that her dress wasn't right for a ball, and my aunt took her home. Archer looked at May, admiring the way she kept away from anything unpleasant. We both understand why her cousin has stayed away, he thought. But I'll never show dear May that I know about the dark cloud over poor Ellen Olenska. So here you can already, so this is the end of chapter 1, and you can already sense that a lot of Newland Archer and May conversation are not said but thought. They don't, or just it is just happening through their looks, through their eyes. They look at each other and they don't need to talk to each other to understand what each other mean. And as you might imagine or guess, that can bring confusion because you interpret the look in a certain way when it doesn't necessarily mean that, or there is this notion in a way or maybe of confusion and also repressed emotions. and lack of clarity in a way. But there is also this connection. So here you can perceive this, or this is how I perceive it as two way. You can understand it two ways. Well, this function, well, this perception of confusion and lack of clarity. But on the other hand, there is this connection when they don't need to talk to each other to understand each other and to know what the other mean. And there is, in a way, a form of intimacy between the two, coming from the same social background, the social same class. They understand the codes of conduct and behavior because they are immersed in it from infancy. So they don't necessarily need to explain things because they know the drill. They know how it works, how how they know the mechanic in a way. You see how people in this society work and how things are meant to be. Now, chapter 2, let's go. A long engagement. After announcing an engagement, the happy pair always made visits to their family and friends. So, the next day, Archer went with May and her mother to see old Mrs. Mingott, the grandmother, so May's grandmother. Archer always enjoyed a visit to her unusual house. Today, he was greatly relieved to find that Countess Olenska was out. So here you can ask yourself, why is he relieved? What is he hiding? The visitors found old Mrs. Mingott in a huge armchair. Oh, what is it? Sorry, what is he hiding? Or perhaps maybe I'm not really not leading you to the right direction, perhaps, but you see that he's happy in a way, relieved. There is a sense of relief that Countess Olenska, the original woman, and this foreign woman is not here, so she's not going to bring novelty to the dread. Well, it's just or bring something new to the afternoon or to the conversation or disturb. She's not going to disturb. Well, let's continue. The visitors found old Mrs. Mingott in a huge armchair, her white hands swimming on the dark waves of her dress like seabirds. She was happy to hear the news and admired May's engagement ring. When will the wedding be? She asked. As soon as possible, Archer began. Oh, they shouldn't hurry, Mamma, said Mrs. Welland quickly. Each of them needs time to get to know the other better. That's stupid, said old Mrs. Mingott. Everybody in New York has always known everybody. She's not wrong. At this moment, the door opened and the Countess Olenska came in, followed by Julius Beaufort. So remember, Julius Beaufort is the husband of the wife who hosted the ball. So they were together outside. So they went, it seems like they went out together. Ah, Beaufort, how lovely to see you, said Mrs. Mingott. You haven't visited for a long time, you know. Yes, I'm afraid that I'm always so busy, replied Beaufort. But I met Countess Ellen in Madison Square, and she allowed me to walk her home. Hmm. I'm hoping that the house will be livelier now that Ellen is here, cried Mrs. Mingott. Now, Beaufort, tell me everything about your ball. Archer, May, and Mrs. Welland were forgotten. So Ellen took them out to the hall, where May and her mother were putting on their coats. Archer saw Countess Olenska looking at him with a smile. I see that you already know about May. I see that you already know about May and me, he said with an embarrassed laugh. She wanted me to tell you last night at the opera, but I couldn't. Not in that crowd. I understand, the Countess replied, when it's something so private. But I'm very happy to hear the news. May and her mother were now by the door, and the Countess held out her hand to Archer. Goodbye. Come and see me some day, she said. Hi, Kitty. Welcome to the live. Thank you for joining us, for joining me, mainly. So we are page 14. So I started reading chapter 2. It's chapter 2. Where was I? So Countess Olenska inviting Newland Archer to visit her sometime in the carriage. So remember, the carriage is the transport, the old car. This is how it used to be the cars in the 19th century, late 19th century, the carriage. So it's basically here, this, the horse pulling a car, I could say, like a little space with wheels to move forward. So you see car, it's shorter. It's the shorter version of carriage, shortened, coming from carriage. Yeah. Right. So where were we? In the carriage, no one talked about the Countess, but Archer knew what May's mother was thinking. She did not approve of Ellen walking up Fifth Avenue with Julius Beaufort. And Ellen should know that a man who had just gotten engaged does not visit married women. So she doesn't really like the fact that Ellen invited Archer, well, Newland. That evening, old Mr. Jackson came to dinner with the Archers. Archer lived with his mother and sister, Jenny, in West 28th Street, and Mr. Jackson was one of his mother's oldest friends. It was not long before the conversation turned to Ellen Olenska. Mrs. Archer was impatient to learn what she could about her son's future cousin. She was very happy about her son's engagement. A mother could not dream of a more perfect wife for her son than May. But she did not like the news of her son's engagement being mixed up with the arrival of that Olenska woman. We were relieved that May's cousin did not go to the ball, said Mrs. Archer. But she was seen by all of New York walking up Fifth Avenue this afternoon with Julius Beaufort, Mr. Jackson replied. Oh dear, said Mrs. Archer. But it's not surprising that poor Ellen doesn't know how to behave. She has such a strange life with her aunt Medora. Why should she hide? Said Archer suddenly. She was unlucky to marry a terrible man, but I don't see why that should make her ashamed. Hmm. That's what the Mingotts are saying, said Mr. Jackson. I don't always agree with them, said Archer, turning red. But Countess Olenska has had an unhappy life. That doesn't make her a bad person. Hmm. I hear that she wants a divorce, said Janie. I hope that she gets one, cried Archer. So now you see how interesting how he defends her compared to the beginning. Well, in the first chapter, he was quite suspicious and not quite amiable towards, well, yeah, not so very happy about the presence of Countess Olenska. And now at dinner, um, he's actually defending her in a way. These words fell like a bomb into the quiet dining room. Mrs. Archer looked hard at her son, and Archer began to speak of something else. So here, just by looking at her son, he knew that that he had crossed the line, that he had spoke too much. After dinner, Archer's mother and sister left the two men. You know that the husband's secretary helped the countess to get away, said Mr. Jackson. I heard that they were living in Switzerland together after that. Archer felt his face turn red again. Well, why not? Women should be free as we are, he said. Mr. Jackson stretched his legs toward the fire and breathed out slowly. So, well, her husband appears to think the same. He isn't trying to get his wife back, he said after a moment. Later, when he was alone in his library, Archer looked at the photograph of May on his desk and thought about the last few days. He expected the time after the announcement. He expected the time after the announcement of his engagement to be one of quiet, hopeful thoughts of the future. But the arrival of Countess Olenska was bringing with it problems that he preferred not to think about. In his world, it was impossible for nice women like May ever to be free in the way that he meant. As a husband, it was his job to guide this innocent girl who knew nothing and expected everything. They lived in a world where the real thing was never said or done. They lived in a world where the real thing, was never said or done. So he had to hide his past from her. And of course, she should not have a past to hide. May was not Archer's first love, but he could not feel ashamed of his past. He was no different from other young men who fell in love with the wrong woman and then saw their mistake. For Mrs. Rushworth, their love was never as important as it was for him, and for a while his heart was broken. And when at last he met May, his mother was very relieved. So here, we learned quite a lot about Archer's past, so Newland. It seems like he had been in love before May. He loved this Mrs. Rushworth, and she broke his heart. Um, so in a way, he found peace with May, but and a sense of purpose as well, because to him, she's this young, 20 something, not even 20s, maybe probably 19 years old girl who doesn't really know the world, um, and to whom he has to teach everything. So this is how he explained uh, how to. He said so. It says that his job is to guide this innocent girl. So this is what he's telling himself. This is my job to do uh, with her. So you see, although what he said, which is quite paradoxal with what he says about Countess Olenska when he's defending her, and when he says that he doesn't understand why she couldn't have left her husband, who was cheating on her, was a terrible man, and why she couldn't leave him and go away with the secretary and be free from her husband. As he said, women should be free as we are, as free as we are. Which is quite a modern way of thinking for a man in relation to the position of women in the couple. Allowing women to be free? That's quite new. That's the novelty here. But he would wish that for, which is interesting, is that he would wish that for women like Countess Olenska, but not so much with his own wife. So you see, when he's talking about May, he wouldn't want to be married to a Countess Olenska because she would not belong to him. She would be a free woman. So he's happy for other women to be free, but not for his wife. So here is a quite paradoxal way of thinking, and an easy way to, or a false way to be progressist in a way. Yes, I want women to be free as we are, but not for my wife, not if we're talking about my wife. You see? Because in the text it says that in his world, it was impossible for nice women. So in a sense, Countess Olenska is not a nice woman. She is a woman that is not an example of behavior in society. She doesn't represent the perfect wife in comparison to May. So that's his vision. Okay, let's continue now. Page 17. A few days later, something terrible happened. Mr. and Mrs. Lovell Mingott invited their friends to a dinner to meet the Countess Olenska, and almost everyone said no. So they sort of organized a welcome dinner party for Countess Olenska, but everyone said no to the invitation. So that shows that says a lot about how people feel about the arrival of Countess Olenska. The only people who agreed to come were the Beauforts and Mr. Jackson. Remember, Mr. Jackson is the Mrs. Archer's old friend. So Newland's mother, friend. Everyone else replied that they were busy. As soon as Archer heard about this, he spoke to his mother, who went straight to Mrs. van der Luden for help. The van der Luden were one of the most superior and powerful families in New York, and even had English dukes and French counts for cousins. They preferred to live quietly and did not often go out, but Mrs. van der Luden was often, and also I would say it's, oh, sorry, I finished reading, because Mrs. van der Luden was, they preferred to live quietly and did not often go out, because Mrs. van der Luden was often ill, sick, yeah. But soon after Mrs. Archer's visit, Countess Olenska received a card inviting her to dinner at the van der Ludens. Their cousin, the Duke of St. Austria, was visiting from England, and they wanted to introduce him to their friends. So you see how the hierarchy of those rich families in New York influence the other ones. So you see that in front of the rejection of all the families, the rejection of the invitation for Countess Olenska's dinner, Mrs. Mingott's dinner for Countess Olenska, Archer actually came to the rescue in a way to the Mingott, because it's their family, it's his family as well. So it will reflect bad on him eventually if it is known that everyone refused the dinner party and the Lovell Mingotts. So he used his connection through his mother and asked the van der Ludens to invite or to do something, to do something for Countess Olenska. And also because Countess Olenska is his cousin, so if she's badly, she's not well accepted, if she's criticized, then it will reflect on him as well. At the van der Ludens dinner, a few days later, Archer studied Countess Olenska from the other end of the table. He remembered her being a pretty little girl as a child who traveled the world with her parents. After their early death, it was her aunt, Medora Manson, who looked after her and brought her back to New York. Archer remembered the little Ellen in colorful clothes, dancing a Spanish dance and singing Italian love songs. Then Medora and Ellen went abroad, and no more was heard of them until the news of Ellen's marriage to a rich and famous Polish count. So you see you have a little bit of background story of Countess Olenska here. So you see that she was an orphan. She lost her parents from a young age, and she was raised by this aunt that liked bohemian life in a way, traveling in Europe and living off um, wealthy men, I guess, or in these European cities. So it seems like she lived in Spain, in Italy, and that was reflected in Ellen's behavior and interests. So here another picture. So we've got Newland here, and it seems like they're having dinner. It seems like it's the scene, the dinner party at the Ludens, Van der Luden. Ellen was now nearly 30. She was thin and looked a little tired, but she was still beautiful. There was something quiet but strong about her, Archer noticed. She was the only young woman at the dinner, but she did not seem at all uncomfortable. Later, after dinner, Archer saw her talking to the English Duke of St. Austria. Archer was surprised when, after a while, she stood up and came toward him. In New York, a woman did not usually leave one man to talk to another, but waited for the man to come to her. So here is another unusual behavior or a foreign behavior coming from Ellen, who decides to stop talking to this man and go to talk to Archer, Newland. So it's not something that is well perceived, as you can understand perhaps here. Tell me about May, she said, but Archer did not answer her question. Have you met the Duke of St. Austria before? He asked. Oh, yes, we saw him every winter in the south of France, the Countess replied. I've never met a more boring man. So here she doesn't hide at all her feelings about this guy and how boring he is. Archer laughed. He enjoyed meeting a woman who was brave enough to say what the Van der Luden's English Duke was boring. Enough to say that, sorry, who was brave enough, sorry, I don't know how I read this sentence. He enjoyed meeting a woman who was brave enough to say that the Van der Luden's English Duke was boring. May is a dear, she went on. There is no girl as beautiful or intelligent in New York. Are you very much in love with her? Archer laughed again. I am, as much as a man can be. She smiled. How wonderful! And your family didn't plan this marriage for you? Archer was surprised. Have you gotten that marriages aren't made that way here? I'm sorry, she said. I sometimes make these mistakes. I don't always remember that everything is good here, which was bad abroad. You're among friends here, you know, he said suddenly. Yes, that's why I came home. I want to forget everything else and become an American again, like the Mingotts and the Wellens and the Archers, she said, touching his arm very lightly. Just then, Mr. Van der Luden came over and the Countess held out her hand to him. Archer stood up. Tomorrow, then, after 5. So that's her speaking. Tomorrow, then, after 5, I shall expect you, she said to Archer, surprising him once more. So here she's expecting him to come over to her place um, to see her. So he's, I would say, we could understand that he is quite shocked by the way she is putting herself forward and asking him to, she's not shy to ask him to come to see her. So this is the end of chapter 2. So I'm going to leave you there with this and thinking, reflecting on these characters, on the way New York society worked at the time, what was accepted, what was not, what was considered as good behavior, bad behavior, or unusual, very, yeah, or not necessarily acceptable. So I'm going to leave you with these reflections and this thinking on the characters. And I hope that you will be interested in discussing more or reflect more on the book and the characters, or just discuss what you understand, what you don't, and just explore this novel together. So I hope you enjoyed, again, this live reading. So make sure that you subscribe to the book club to attend our first live workshop not next Saturday, but the Saturday on the 23rd, sorry. So the first live workshop on the 23rd of November at 9 a.m. On Zoom. So until then, I will see you this Saturday, actually, at 6:30 p.m. Central European Time for the live reading of chapters 3 and 4. So that will be live on Instagram, as always, and then available on this YouTube channel, perhaps just after the live. Yeah, surely. So I wish you a beautiful end of the day, and I will see you on Saturday for session 2. Bye.